from Park City, Utah, and has been involved in all aspects of resort development and leadership training since 1971. He served as Public Affairs and Planning Director for Park City, Utah, and as Community Development Director for Crested Butte, Colorado. His association with the Telluride region goes back to 1972, when he spoke here for the first time, and he's got numerous friends and associates in this community, so a lot of you know who he is, but a lot of you haven't heard him speak yet, including myself, so I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say. Please welcome Myles Rademan.
Thank you. Is this on now? Can people hear me? Great, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jody, for your presentation. I speak rather quickly, and I'm going to cover a vast amount of territory with a lot of slides. And so I'll only be pointing out certain things on slides. They're going to go by almost like a motion picture, so I hope I don't give you vertigo, but it's just sort of the way I work here. I always like to start out with a disclaimer, and I use Mark Twain's famous quote that sometimes it's better to keep your mouth shut and let people think you're stupid than to open it and confirm it. All I can give you is sort of my interpretation of reality. I'm not saying it's real, it's my interpretation of reality. You can decide for yourself. I would feel foolish if I was invited here and didn't share the 38 years of experience I've had in the resort towns with you, and you would probably be equally foolish if you paid too much attention to what I have to say. I'll show you how fast I'm going to go. People always say start at the beginning. Okay, there's creation, the earth cooled, and there was Telluride. So I covered 4 billion years in just 3 slides, so we moved along pretty quickly here. And what I want to talk about today really gets down to 3 things: hindsight, foresight, and probably most importantly, insight. Insight, the 3 kinds of sight. Let me set the stage, and I know we're just a little bit global things here, but let's talk about trends to consider that all of us have to deal with, whether we live in Telluride or we live in New York or Paris or wherever we live. You know, change, I want to really start out with change. And it's been said that the Stone Age didn't end because they ran out of stones. And that's quite true. So what changed that a whole cultural, our whole outlook has changed? Well, for most of our history as human beings, change really happened very slowly. And, I have a picture of a glacier here because we would talk about glacial change. Sometimes the legislative process still seems glacial in its nature. As a matter of fact, I was a history major, and I remember, well, one thing I remember from college was that the teacher had said to us, he said, unless you were an expert in Egyptian history, you couldn't tell the difference in the art over 2,500 years and 20 dynasties of Egyptian history. So you sort of grew up and you did what your parents did. You weren't expecting to do anything different. That's the way life progressed. This whole idea of rapid change just didn't exist. And yet in the blink of an eye, really, in our generation, our parents' generation, everything has changed. And now we talk about, and I see them advertising all the time on television, a tsunami of change. How do you deal with this cascading, dangerous set of events that's sweeping over us all the time? I love to use cartoons from New Yorker, secretary talking to his boss, sir, the following paradigm shift occurred while you were out. And it seems that there's a lot of truth to that. We sort of go someplace and everything gets moving. And the reality is that there are far more cultures and the results of far more cultures and the shards of far more cultures that didn't deal successfully with change. We have some here in our own Southwest with Anasazi. We don't know why these cultures disappeared, but for whatever reason, perhaps the height of their civilization, they did disappear. Something changed and they didn't. So there's no guarantee that we're not very good at dealing with change, quite frankly, and yet that's what we're confronted with. Some cultures, like the Chinese, have built walls to keep change at bay. This is the largest masonry structure in the world, about 1,300 miles of masonry to keep out change. They called it barbarians. The Han Chinese didn't want the Mongols coming in because they represented a threat. And for most of us, change is threatening. Change is threatening. So they tried to keep it out. And it's only recently that sort of change leapt over the wall and they finally embraced it with the Beijing Olympics a little bit. Well, we all like a roadmap to know what the future brings. Here's at the recent annual meeting of the International Association of Clairvoyance. The meeting began by reading the minutes of next year's meeting. Now, don't we wish that it was that easy, that we could also look into the future and know what's going to happen, and yet we don't. We know things are changing, we know things are unsettled, but we don't know what's going to happen. What most people tell us about what the future is going to look like is they say it's characterized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. These are curse words. These are not things that most of us really enjoy, unless you're a hedge fund operator. Other than that, you don't like a lot of this because it really is stressful. It's stressful. All the certainties, the verities, all the signs pointing in mutually opposite directions leave us stressed out. And it leads to dis-ease. We're not eased in ourselves because we don't know where to stand. The sand is shifting under us all the time. And yet we'd all like to go back to the sort of Leave It to Beaver. Remember the Cleaver family? The Leave It to Beaver America, that's Telluride, Park City, Crested. These are great places like this. This is the last refuge of the Leave It to Beaver generations around. But the irony is that if we want things to stay as they are, many things will have to change. Sort of like a cone, And anyhow, what transition psychologists tell us is this, that there are responses to change that are very similar to the death and dying. And a lot of this came out of the death and dying set of literature where, you go through various stages. So, you're happily walking along and everything's good in your life. Some shock happens, whatever it is. There's some provisional adjustments, some inner crisis as things don't seem to add up anymore, the change cascades. We start to come to grips with our inner contradictions as we're doing now in our economy. We can reconstruct a new reality, we recover somehow, we come back to some sense of well-being. And it seems that there is this sort of cycle that we can go through. Generally, when we get stressed like that, though, we turn to some expert. Here's a man crawling through the desert and he says, thank God, a panel of experts. We tend to turn to someone outside of ourselves because we are so stressed out and so disoriented that we think someone else knows something that we don't. Now, I'm not putting this down because I've made a pretty good living out of being a consultant. Judy, you're a consultant, so you know that you hire consultants and they generally point in different directions too. I know in Crested Butte we always had a saying that a consultant is a man who knows 10,000 ways to make love but doesn't know any women.